Hi, I'm Connor Blake. My own brother had me arrested on false charges and watched as they dragged me out in handcuffs in front of my colleagues. My parents stood there, silent, believing every lie he told. They didn't know I'd spent 3 years building something they couldn't even comprehend. They didn't know I had connections that reached higher than any of them could imagine. But the worst part? It wasn't the humiliation or the night I spent in that cell. It was realizing that my own blood had weaponized the system against me just to steal what I'd built. So I stayed quiet. I let the case play out. I let them think they'd won. And then, when they were comfortable, when they thought I was broken, I made one call. Now the investigators aren't asking questions about me anymore. They're asking about him, and I wonder, do they regret laughing now? Do you? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The air in downtown Portland carried that distinct autumn chill, the kind that made you pull your coat a little tighter as you walked. I stood outside the coffee shop on Hawthorne Boulevard, watching the morning crowd shuffle past, briefcases in hand, earbuds blocking out the world. It had been 4 years since I last walked these streets as a free man. 4 years since the day everything I'd built came crashing down because of one phone call, one lie, one brother who decided that destroying me was easier than competing with me. My name is Connor Blake, and if you'd asked anyone in my family back then, they would have told you I was the problem, the troublemaker, the one who always wanted too much, too fast. My brother, Dominic, he was the golden one, responsible, measured, the kind of guy who showed up to family dinners with wine and compliments, who remembered birthdays and anniversaries, who never rocked the boat. I rocked the boat. I didn't just rock it, I flipped it over and built a better one. By the time I was 28, I'd co-founded a software analytics company called Apex Meridian. We specialized in predictive data modeling for mid-sized companies, helping them identify market trends before their competitors even knew what was happening. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't social media or cryptocurrency or any of the buzzwords that made headlines. It was quiet, strategic, and extremely profitable. Dominic hated that. He worked in commercial real estate, flipping properties and brokering deals that sounded impressive at cocktail parties, but never quite seemed to close the way he promised. He wore expensive suits and drove a leased BMW, but beneath all that polish was a man drowning in debt and desperate to prove he was still ahead. When I told him about Apex Meridian, he laughed. He actually laughed. Predictive modeling? Sounds like fortune-telling with spreadsheets. That was at Thanksgiving, 3 weeks before he called the FBI. The accusation was simple and devastating: wire fraud. He claimed I'd been using client data to manipulate stock recommendations, funneling insider information to offshore accounts. The evidence he provided was convincing enough to get federal agents knocking on my office door at 9 a.m. on a Tuesday morning. I remember the sound of their knuckles against the glass. Firm, authoritative, the kind of knock that doesn't wait for permission. My assistant, Ivy Newman, looked up from her desk, eyes wide. "Connor, there are people here." I walked out of my office to find 3 agents standing in the lobby, badges already out. Behind them, through the glass doors, I could see 2 more waiting by a black sedan. "Connor Blake?" the lead agent asked, though he already knew the answer. "That's me. We have a warrant for your arrest on suspicion of wire fraud and securities manipulation. You need to come with us." The office went silent. 23 employees, all of them watching, all of them processing what this meant. Some looked confused. Others looked betrayed, like I'd just confirmed every doubt they'd ever buried. I didn't fight. I didn't yell or demand explanations. I simply held out my wrists and let them cuff me. The metal was cold, tighter than it needed to be, and the click echoed louder than anything I'd ever heard. As they walked me through the lobby, past the desks and the conference rooms and the motivational posters we'd hung up as a joke, I saw Ivy pressing her hand to her mouth, tears already forming. I wanted to tell her it was a mistake, that this would get cleared up, but the words stuck in my throat. Outside, the morning sun was too bright. A small crowd had gathered on the sidewalk, phones out, recording everything. One of the agents put his hand on my head and guided me into the back seat. The door slammed shut, and through the tinted window I saw him. Dominic. He was standing across the street, leaning against a parking meter, arms folded, watching. He wasn't hiding. He wanted me to see him, wanted me to know exactly who'd done this. Our eyes met for just a second, and he smiled. Not a grin, not a smirk, just a small, satisfied smile that said, "I win." The car pulled away, and I didn't look back. They took me to a federal holding facility on the east side of town. I was processed, fingerprinted, photographed, and placed in a cell with a man who'd been arrested for check fraud and wouldn't stop talking about his ex-wife. I sat on the bench, hands folded, staring at the cinder block wall, trying to make sense of what had just happened. My lawyer, Maxwell Hart, arrived 6 hours later. He was a sharp guy, mid-40s, with silver-rimmed glasses and a reputation for getting white-collar cases dismissed before they ever saw a courtroom. He sat across from me in the interview room, legal pad open, pen already moving. "Walk me through everything," he said, "from the beginning." I told him about Apex Meridian, about the client contracts, about the algorithms we'd developed. I told him about Dominic, about the tension between us, about the Thanksgiving dinner where he'd mocked my work. Maxwell stopped writing and looked up. "You think your brother did this?" "I know he did." "Can you prove it?" I hesitated. "Not yet." He leaned back, tapping his pen against the pad. "Then we've got a problem. The evidence they have against you, it's detailed. Bank records, email logs, transaction histories. Someone put a lot of work into building this case. It's fabricated. I believe you. But belief doesn't hold up in federal court. We need proof." He got me released on bail the next morning. I walked out of that facility into the gray Portland drizzle, feeling like a ghost. My phone had 87 missed calls, most of them from reporters. My company's board had already issued a statement placing me on indefinite leave pending investigation. My parents hadn't called once. I took a cab back to my apartment in the Pearl District. The building felt different, quieter, like the walls themselves were judging me. I dropped my keys on the counter and stood in the kitchen, staring at nothing. That's when my phone buzzed. A text from my mother. "We need to talk. Come to the house tomorrow, 6 p.m. No. Are you okay? No, we're here for you. Just a summons." I didn't respond. The next evening, I drove out to their place in Beaverton, a sprawling 2-story home with a manicured lawn and a fountain that never seemed to stop running. Dominic's car was already in the driveway. Of course it was. I walked in without knocking. They were all sitting in the living room. My father, stern-faced as always, reading glasses perched on his nose. My mother, hands folded in her lap, lips pressed into a thin line. And Dominic sitting in the armchair like he owned the place, legs crossed, sipping scotch. "Connor," my father said, not looking up from his newspaper, "sit." I stayed standing. My mother sighed. "This is exactly the kind of attitude that got you into this mess." "I didn't do anything wrong." Dominic set his glass down, the ice clinking softly. "The FBI seems to think otherwise." "The FBI was lied to." "By who?" he asked, eyebrows raised, playing innocent. I stared at him, jaw clenched, every muscle in my body screaming to call him out right there, but I didn't. Not yet. My father finally looked up. "Regardless of what happened, you've embarrassed this family. Your face is all over the news. Do you have any idea what that does to our reputation?" "I was arrested on false charges." "Then why haven't they dropped them?" my mother asked, her voice sharp. "Because your son is a liar," I wanted to say. "Because he set me up. Because you're all too blind to see it." But I didn't say any of that. I just turned and walked out, the sound of their voices fading behind me as the door swung shut. I sat in my car for a long time, hands gripping the steering wheel, breathing slowly. That's when I made the decision. I wasn't going to fight this the way they expected. I wasn't going to yell or beg or defend myself to people who'd already made up their minds. I was going to disappear, rebuild. And when I came back, it wouldn't be as the accused. It would be as the one holding all the cards. 3 years passed, like water slipping through cracks. Slow at first, then all at once. I left Portland the week after my bail hearing and never looked back. My lawyer, Maxwell, handled the court proceedings remotely while I relocated to Seattle. renting a one-bedroom apartment in Capitol Hill under an LLC I'd quietly established months before the arrest. No one knew where I was, and that's exactly how I needed it. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The case against me collapsed 6 months later. Turns out, when federal investigators actually dig into the evidence instead of taking it at face value, fabricated documents don't hold up. The emails had been spoofed. The bank records manipulated. The offshore accounts didn't exist. Maxwell filed motions. The prosecution stumbled. And one Tuesday morning, the charges were dismissed without prejudice. I should have felt relief. Instead, I felt nothing. Just a cold, quiet resolve. While Dominic celebrated what he thought was my destruction, I spent those 3 years doing something he never expected. I rebuilt. But this time, I didn't build loud. I built silent, strategic, and far beyond anything Apex Meridian had ever been. I partnered with 2 former colleagues who believed in me when no one else did. Together, we launched a new venture, Crescent Solutions, a private equity and advisory firm specializing in forensic business analysis. We helped companies identify internal fraud, data breaches, and financial misconduct. Ironic, considering what I'd been accused of. But that irony became our edge. I knew how people lied. I knew how they covered their tracks. And I knew how to find the truth they tried to bury. Within 18 months, we had contracts with 6 Fortune 500 companies. By year 3, we'd consulted on cases involving over $400 million in recovered assets. My name wasn't on any press release. I operated through proxies, silent partnerships, and airtight NDAs. To the outside world, Connor Blake had vanished. But behind the scenes, I was building something untouchable. Then, one morning in late September, I got a call from Maxwell. "Connor, you sitting down?" "Should I be?" "Your brother just closed a deal. Big one. He's being featured in Portland Business Monthly next week. Real estate mogul, they're calling him. Self-made success story." I leaned back in my chair, staring out at the Seattle skyline. Rain streaked down the glass. "Self-made?" "Yeah, thought you'd want to know." I thanked him and hung up. Then I opened my laptop and pulled up the article preview. There he was, Dominic Blake, standing in front of a high-rise development in downtown Portland. Arms crossed, confident smile, tailored suit. The headline read, "From humble beginnings to high-rise dreams, how Dominic Blake built an empire." I read the whole piece. Every word. He talked about perseverance, about taking risks, about how setbacks only made him stronger. He mentioned family briefly, thanking our parents for their unwavering support. My name didn't appear once. I closed the laptop and made a decision. It was time to go back. 2 weeks later, I was standing outside a glass tower on Morrison Street in downtown Portland. The building was new, sleek, all reflective panels and sharp angles. A digital sign near the entrance read, "Blake Properties, 12th floor." I adjusted my tie, a charcoal gray silk number I'd bought specifically for this moment, and walked through the revolving doors. The lobby was all marble and mood lighting, the kind of space designed to make you feel small. A receptionist looked up as I approached, her smile polite but distant. "Good afternoon, do you have an appointment?" "I'm here to see Dominic Blake." "And your name?" "Connor Blake." Her fingers froze over the keyboard. She glanced up at me, eyes narrowing slightly, like she was trying to place where she'd heard that name before. Then recognition flickered across her face. "One moment, please." She picked up the phone, spoke quietly, then hung up. "Mr. Blake is in a meeting, but his assistant will be down shortly." I nodded and took a seat in one of the leather chairs near the window. From here, I could see the street below, people moving like ants, oblivious to everything happening 12 floors above them. 5 minutes later, the elevator doors opened, and a woman stepped out. She was tall, professional, with dark hair pulled into a tight bun. She walked directly to me. "Mr. Blake? I'm Julia Patterson, Mr. Blake's executive assistant. He wasn't expecting you." "I know. I didn't make an appointment." She hesitated, clearly unsure how to handle this. He's in the middle of a client presentation. If you'd like to schedule something for later this week. I'll wait. She blinked. It could be a while. I've got time. She nodded slowly, then returned to the elevator. I watched the numbers climb. 12. The doors closed. I waited. An hour passed. Then another. Other people came and went, signing in, taking calls, disappearing into elevators. The receptionist glanced at me occasionally, but didn't ask me to leave. Maybe she sensed something. Maybe she just didn't care. Finally, at 4:47 p.m., the elevator doors opened again, and this time, Dominic stepped out. He was mid-conversation with two men in suits, laughing at something one of them said. He shook their hands, clapped one on the shoulder, and turned toward the exit. That's when he saw me. His smile faltered, just for a second. Then it returned, but smaller, tighter, like a mask that didn't quite fit anymore. The two men left. Dominic stood there, hands in his pockets, staring at me from across the lobby. He didn't move. Neither did I. Finally, he walked over, slow and deliberate, stopping a few feet away. "Connor," he said, his voice even, "didn't expect to see you here." "I'm sure you didn't." He glanced at the receptionist, then back at me. "You should have called ahead. I've got back-to-back meetings today." "This won't take long." He studied me for a moment, then gestured toward the elevator. "Come on up." We rode in silence. The elevator hummed softly, the numbers climbing. When the doors opened on the 12th floor, I followed him down a hallway lined with glass-walled offices. Employees glanced up as we passed, then quickly looked away. His office was at the end of the hall, corner view, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. The desk was massive, dark wood, polished to a mirror shine. On the credenza behind it sat a row of framed photos, him shaking hands with city officials, him at a ribbon-cutting ceremony, him standing next to our parents at some charity gala. He closed the door and gestured to one of the chairs. "Have a seat." I stayed standing. He sighed, moving behind his desk. "So, what brings you back to Portland? Thought you'd disappeared for good." "I did, for a while." "Heard the charges got dropped. Congrats." "Thanks. No thanks to you." His jaw tightened. "I don't know what you think I did, Connor, but—" "Stop." He paused. I stepped closer to the desk. "I'm not here to argue. I'm not here to rehash the past. I just wanted you to know something." "What's that?" "I know what you did. I know how you did it. And I know why." His expression didn't change, but his fingers twitched against the armrest of his chair. "And here's the thing," I continued, my voice calm, steady. "I could have come back swinging. Could have dragged you through court, ruined your reputation, made sure everyone knew what kind of person you really are." "But you didn't," he said, his tone almost mocking. "No, I didn't." He leaned back, a small smile creeping onto his face. "So why are you here? To tell me you forgive me? To make peace?" I reached into my jacket and pulled out a single sheet of paper. I placed it on his desk. He glanced down at it, then back at me. "What's this?" "A courtesy." He picked it up, eyes scanning the text. His face went pale. It was a subpoena. Federal investigation into financial fraud and conspiracy. Target: Dominic Blake. He looked up at me, the paper trembling slightly in his hand. "What the hell is this?" "Like I said, a courtesy. I wanted you to hear it from me first before the agents show up." His voice rose. "You did this." "No. You did this. I just made a few calls." He stood, slamming the paper onto the desk. "You can't do this. You have no proof. This is—" "Proof?" I interrupted. "Funny you mention that. Turns out, when you fabricate evidence against someone, you leave a trail. Email headers, IP addresses, wire transfer records. You weren't as careful as you thought." His mouth opened, but no words came out. I turned and walked toward the door. "Connor, wait." I stopped, hand on the handle, and looked back at him. "You wanted to destroy me because you thought I was a threat. But you made one mistake." "What's that?" "You thought I'd stayed down." I opened the door and walked out, leaving him standing there in his glass tower, holding a piece of paper that would unravel everything he'd built. The elevator doors closed, and for the first time in 3 years, I smiled. The rain started just as I stepped out of the building. Not the soft drizzle Portland was famous for, but a steady, deliberate rain that soaked through everything. I didn't rush. I walked slowly down Morrison Street, hands in my pockets, letting the cold water run down the back of my neck. It felt like baptism, like washing away 3 years of silence. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out. Maxwell. "Tell me you didn't just do what I think you did," he said before I could even say hello. "Depends on what you think I did." "I got a call from a federal prosecutor I know. Said a major fraud investigation just got fast-tracked. Target's name is Dominic Blake. Ring any bells?" I kept walking, dodging a puddle near the curb. Might have heard that name before. Maxwell let out a long breath. "Connor, we talked about this. You can't just weaponize the justice system because you're angry." "I'm not angry." "Then what are you?" I stopped under an awning, watching the rain pour down like a curtain between me and the rest of the world. "I'm done being the one everyone gets to step on." There was a pause on the other end. Then Maxwell spoke, quieter this time. "What did you find?" "Everything." And I had. It took 6 months of digging, but once I knew where to look, the rest fell into place like dominoes. Dominic hadn't just fabricated evidence against me. He'd been running a scheme for years, using his real estate deals as a front for something much darker. It started with a forensic accountant I hired privately, a woman named Sienna Elliott who specialized in white-collar crime. I gave her one task: follow the money. She found shell companies registered in Delaware and Nevada, all linked back to Dominic's firm. On paper, they looked legitimate, just standard corporate structures for real estate investments. But Sienna noticed something unusual. The money flowing through those companies didn't match the projects Dominic claimed they were funding. There were properties listed as under development that didn't exist. Construction contracts with vendors who had no physical address. Loan applications backed by falsified appraisals. Dominic had been inflating property values, securing loans based on those inflated numbers, then funneling the money into offshore accounts. It was textbook mortgage fraud, scaled up and hidden behind layers of corporate paperwork. But that wasn't even the worst part. The worst part was that he'd used my arrest as cover. While the FBI was busy investigating me, while the media was dragging my name through the mud, Dominic had ramped up his operation. He'd closed 4 major deals in 6 months, each one bigger than the last, each one funded by loans he had no intention of repaying. Sienna handed me a report 3 inches thick. I read every page. Then I made a call to an old contact from my Apex Meridian days, a man named Eli Barrett, who now worked as a financial crimes analyst for a federal task force. I didn't tell him who I was calling about. I just asked a hypothetical question about mortgage fraud and how investigations typically got triggered. "Usually through a whistleblower," Eli said. "Someone inside the operation who sees something wrong and reports it. Or sometimes through pattern recognition, banks flag suspicious activity, regulators notice irregularities, that kind of thing." "What if someone had concrete evidence?" I asked. "Documents, transaction records, shell company registrations. Would that be enough to start an investigation?" Eli paused. "If the evidence is solid, absolutely." "Why? You got something?" "Maybe." 2 weeks later, I sent an anonymous package to the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. Inside was a USB drive containing every document Sienna had compiled, along with a detailed analysis of Dominic's shell companies, loan applications, and offshore accounts. I didn't include my name. I didn't need to. The evidence spoke for itself. It took the FBI 11 days to open an investigation. I know because Maxwell called me the moment he heard. That's when I decided it was time to deliver the subpoena in person. I wanted Dominic to see my face. I wanted him to know that this wasn't random, that this wasn't some bureaucratic accident. I wanted him to understand exactly who had ended him. Now standing under that awning, rain hammering the pavement around me, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Not satisfaction, not revenge, just clarity. The kind that comes when you finally stop pretending things will get better on their own and start taking control of the narrative. Maxwell was still on the line. "Connor, are you listening?" "Yeah, I'm here. This is going to get messy. You know that, right? When Dominic figures out you're behind this, he's going to come after you. He's going to claim you're retaliating, that this is all fabricated, that you're trying to frame him the same way he framed you. Let him. Connor, Max, I've got 3 years of documentation. I've got timestamps, IP records, financial trails that lead directly back to him. I've got testimony from vendors he stiffed, contractors he lied to, banks he defrauded. If he wants to come after me, he's welcome to try. Maxwell went quiet. Then he sighed. All right, just don't do anything stupid. And for the love of God, don't talk to the press. Wasn't planning on it. I hung up and slipped the phone back into my pocket. Across the street, through the rain-streaked glass of a coffee shop, I saw a familiar face, my mother. She was sitting at a corner table with someone I didn't recognize, her hands wrapped around a mug, her expression tired. She looked older than I remembered. More fragile. For a second I thought about walking over there, thought about sitting down and telling her everything. But then I remembered the way she'd looked at me that night in Beaverton, the way she'd asked why the charges hadn't been dropped, like guilt was already assumed, the way she'd sided with Dominic without even asking for my side of the story. So I turned and kept walking. By the time I reached my car, my shirt was soaked through. I slid into the driver's seat and sat there for a moment, hands on the wheel, staring at the rain sliding down the windshield. My phone buzzed again. This time it was a text from an unknown number. You just made a very big mistake. I stared at the message, no name, no context, but I knew who it was. I typed back, No, you did. 3 years ago. I hit send, tossed the phone onto the passenger seat, and started the engine. The wipers scraped across the glass, clearing the water in stuttering arcs. I pulled out of the parking space and drove through the rain-soaked streets of Portland. The city blurring past me like a memory I was finally ready to leave behind. But I wasn't leaving, not yet. Because this wasn't over, it was just beginning. And this time, I wasn't the one on trial. I didn't go back to Seattle that night. Instead, I checked into a boutique hotel in the Pearl District, a place called the Irving, tucked away on a quiet street where tourists rarely wandered. The room was small but clean, with exposed brick walls and a window that overlooked a narrow alleyway. I dropped my bag on the bed, peeled off my wet clothes, and stood under a scalding shower until my skin turned red. When I finally emerged, wrapped in the hotel's thick white robe, I sat at the small desk by the window and opened my laptop. The rain had stopped, leaving the streets slick and reflective under the glow of streetlights. Somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed, then faded into the night. I pulled up the encrypted folder Sienna had sent me weeks ago, the one I hadn't fully gone through yet, the one labeled Additional Findings. I'd been putting it off, not because I was afraid of what I'd find, but because I knew once I opened it there would be no turning back. I clicked it open. Inside were dozens of files, PDFs, scanned documents, spreadsheets, and a subfolder labeled Personal Correspondence. I started with the spreadsheets. They detailed financial transactions dating back 7 years, long before my arrest, long before Apex Meridian had even been a thought in my head. Money moving between accounts with names I didn't recognize, companies that sounded legitimate but had no actual business operations. Then I opened the correspondence folder. The first document was an email chain between Dominic and someone named Hayden Burke. I didn't recognize the name at first, but a quick search told me everything I needed to know. Hayden Burke was a commercial loan officer at Cascade Financial Group, one of the largest regional banks in the Pacific Northwest. He'd worked there for 12 years, had a clean record, and, according to his LinkedIn profile, specialized in high-value commercial real estate financing. The emails were dated 3 months before my arrest. The subject line read, RE, Bridge Financing for Hawthorne Tower Project. I scrolled through the thread. Most of it was standard business correspondence, discussions about loan terms, interest rates, repayment schedules. But then I found one that made my stomach drop. It was from Dominic to Hayden, sent at 11:43 p.m. on a Tuesday. Need to accelerate the approval timeline. My brother's company is about to go public with some new tech that could complicate things on my end. The sooner we close this, the better. Can you push the underwriting team to expedite? Hayden's response came an hour later. I can try, but they're going to need updated financials and appraisals. You mentioned your family has some resources that could help backstop the loan. Can we loop them in? Dominic replied, already handled. My parents are putting up their estate as additional collateral, just need the paperwork drawn up. I read that line 3 times. My parents, their estate. The house in Beaverton, the one they'd owned for 30 years. The one my mother had spent countless hours decorating. The one my father had meticulously maintained. Dominic had used it as collateral for a loan, and based on the rest of the email chain, he'd never told them the full details. I opened the next document. It was a signed collateral agreement, dated 2 weeks after that email exchange. My parents' signatures were at the bottom, notarized and certified. But there was something off about the document. The loan amount listed was $2.3 million, but according to the bank record Sienna had pulled, the actual loan Dominic had received was $4.7 million. Someone had altered the paperwork after my parents signed it, inflating the loan amount and increasing the risk without their knowledge. My hands were shaking as I closed the file. I stood up, paced the small room, trying to process what I'd just read. Dominic hadn't just set me up. He'd put our parents' home on the line for a fraudulent loan, one that was now underwater because the Hawthorne Tower project had never been completed. According to the documents, construction had stalled 8 months ago due to unforeseen complications, which was corporate speak for we ran out of money. If the bank called the loan, and they would once the FBI investigation went public, my parents would lose everything. I sat back down and opened another file. This one was a scanned copy of a handwritten letter, the ink slightly faded, the paper creased from being folded and unfolded multiple times. It was addressed to me, written in handwriting I recognized immediately. My grandmother's. She'd passed away 5 years ago, quietly, in her sleep, just a few months before I started Apex Meridian. I'd been too busy to attend the funeral, too caught up in pitch meetings and investor calls to take the time to say goodbye. It was one of my biggest regrets, one I'd carried with me every day since. The letter was dated 6 months before her death. My dearest Connor, it began. If you're reading this, it means I'm gone, and someone finally had the sense to go through my things properly. I wanted to write this while I still had the clarity to say what needs to be said. I leaned closer to the screen, reading slowly. I've watched you grow into a man I'm so proud of. You've always had a fire in you, a drive that scared your father and confused your mother. They didn't understand it because they've never had it themselves. But I saw it. I always saw it. My throat tightened. I need to tell you something I should have told you years ago. When your grandfather passed, he left behind more than just the house and the savings accounts. He left a trust, one that was meant to be divided equally among his grandchildren. That includes you, Dominic, and your sister, Autumn. I frowned. I'd never heard anything about a trust. After my grandfather died, there'd been a small funeral, a quiet estate settlement, and then everyone moved on. No one had ever mentioned a trust. The letter continued. Your father was named the executor, and he was supposed to distribute the funds when each of you turned 30. But I found out, quite by accident, that he'd been using the trust to cover Dominic's debts. Business loans that went bad, credit card bills, legal fees from that incident in college that we all agreed never to speak of again. I sat back, stunned. My grandfather's trust. Money that was supposed to be mine, that was supposed to help me start my life, had been funneled to Dominic to clean up his mistakes. I confronted your father, the letter went on. We had a terrible fight. He said he was protecting the family, that Dominic needed help, and you were doing fine on your own. I told him that wasn't his decision to make. But he wouldn't listen. He never does. The next paragraph made my chest ache. I'm leaving this letter with my attorney, Kalen Vireth, along with instructions to make sure you get a full accounting of the trust once I'm gone. I don't know if it will be enough to make things right, but I want you to know the truth. You were never the problem, Connor. You were just the one they didn't know how to control. The letter ended with her signature, shaky but unmistakable. I closed the laptop and sat in the darkness, the only light coming from the street lamp outside. My grandmother had known. She'd known about the money, about the lies, about the way my family had quietly erased my share of the inheritance. And she'd tried to protect me, even after she was gone. I grabbed my phone and called Maxwell. He answered on the third ring, voice groggy. Connor, it's almost midnight. I need you to find someone. Kalen Vireth. She was my grandmother's attorney. There was a pause, then the sound of rustling papers. Vireth. Got it. What's this about? There's a trust. My grandfather's estate. I need to see the full accounting, every transaction, every distribution. Can you get that? If she's still practicing, yeah. I'll track her down first thing in the morning. Thanks, Max. I hung up and stared at the dark screen of my laptop. Dominic hadn't just stolen my reputation. He'd stolen my inheritance, used my parents' home as collateral for his fraud, and built his entire empire on lies and manipulation. And now, for the first time, I had proof of all of it. I opened the laptop again and started a new document. At the top, I typed, Evidence Summary, Dominic Blake. Then, I began copying every relevant file, every email, every transaction record, every scanned document, organizing them into a timeline that even the most skeptical investigator couldn't ignore. By the time I finished, the sun was starting to rise, casting pale orange light across the brick wall of the alley outside. I saved the document, encrypted it, and sent it to 3 different secure locations: Maxwell's server, Sienna's encrypted cloud, and a physical USB drive I'd mailed to a safety deposit box I kept under a different name. I wasn't taking any chances. If Dominic was going to fight back, I was going to make sure the truth survived, no matter what happened to me. I closed the laptop, pulled the curtains shut, and finally let myself sleep. I woke up to my phone vibrating against the nightstand. The room was dark, the curtains blocking out what little afternoon light tried to creep through. I grabbed the phone and checked the time. 2:17 p.m. I'd slept for almost 8 hours, longer than I had in months. The call was from Maxwell. I answered, voice still rough with sleep. You awake? He asked. Barely. Good. I found Kalen Vereth. She's retired now, living out in Hood River, but she still keeps records from all her old cases. I told her who I was representing, and she said she's been waiting for someone to ask about your grandmother's estate for years. I sat up, rubbing my eyes. Years? Her words, not mine. She said she tried reaching out to your father multiple times after your grandmother passed, but he never responded. Eventually she gave up. But she kept the files, just in case. Can we meet with her? Already set it up. Tomorrow morning, 10 a.m., I'll pick you up from your hotel. Thanks, Max. I hung up and headed to the bathroom, splashing cold water on my face. My reflection in the mirror looked tired. Older somehow, like the last 3 years had carved lines I hadn't noticed before. I stared at myself for a moment, then turned away. I spent the rest of the afternoon in the hotel room, going over the documents again, making notes, building a mental map of everything I'd uncovered. The more I read, the clearer the picture became. Dominic had been running this scheme long before I was ever a threat to him. My success with Apex Meridian had just accelerated his timeline, made him desperate enough to take risks he might have otherwise avoided. That evening, I walked down to a small diner a few blocks away, a place called Stella's that served breakfast all day. I ordered coffee and a plate of scrambled eggs, sitting in a corner booth where I could see the door. Old habits. The kind you pick up when you've spent enough time looking over your shoulder. Halfway through my meal, my phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. We need to talk. Meet me at Laurelhurst Park, East Entrance, 8 p.m. Come alone. No name, no context, but I knew exactly who it was. I finished my eggs, paid the check, and headed back to the hotel. I changed into dark jeans and a jacket, then checked my phone one more time. 7:34 p.m., enough time to walk there. Laurelhurst Park was one of those places that felt frozen in time, with old trees, winding paths, and a pond where ducks gathered at sunset. I arrived at the east entrance at 7:58 p.m. and waited. At exactly 8 o'clock, Dominic appeared from the shadows near the tree line. He looked different than he had in his office. Less polished. His tie was loosened, his hair slightly disheveled, and there were dark circles under his eyes. He stopped a few feet away, hands in his pockets. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. You couldn't just let it go, he finally said, his voice low. Neither could you. He laughed, but it was hollow. You think you've won, don't you? You think because you've got the FBI sniffing around, because you've got some documents and emails, that you've beaten me. I don't think anything, I know. His jaw clenched. You have no idea what you've done. The people I work with, the deals I've made, you've put a target on both our backs. I didn't put the target there, you did, 3 years ago when you decided destroying me was easier than competing with me. He stepped closer, his voice rising. You were always so self-righteous, Connor. Always acting like you were better than everyone else. You think Mom and Dad didn't see it? You think I didn't see it? You look down on all of us. I never look down on anyone. I just refuse to shrink myself to make you feel bigger. That hit him. I could see it in the way his shoulders tensed, the way his hands balled into fists in his pockets. I tried to warn you, he said quietly, that Thanksgiving. I told you that your little tech company was a joke. I was trying to save you from embarrassing yourself. No, you were trying to convince yourself I'd fail. Because if I succeeded, it meant you were the one who'd been falling behind. He looked away, jaw working. You're going to regret this. Maybe. But at least I'll regret it knowing I told the truth. He turned and walked away without another word, disappearing back into the shadows. I stood there for a few more minutes, listening to the distant sound of traffic and the rustle of leaves in the wind. Then I pulled out my phone and called Sienna. She answered immediately. Connor, are you okay? I saw your location ping near the park. I'm fine. Dominic just wanted to make some threats. Nothing I didn't expect. Did he admit to anything? Not directly, but he's scared. That's enough for now. There was a pause, then Sienna said I found something else. Another shell company, this one registered in the Cayman Islands. It's linked to a real estate investment fund that Dominic's been using to move money offshore. But here's the interesting part. One of the other partners in that fund is Hayden Burke, the loan officer from Cascade Financial. My pulse quickened. So they're working together. Not just working together, they're co-conspirators. Burke approved loans he knew were fraudulent, and Dominic kicked back a percentage through the offshore fund. I've got transaction records showing payments from Dominic's accounts to Burke's within days of each loan approval. That's conspiracy to commit fraud. That's federal prison. Exactly, and if Burke flips, if he agrees to testify against Dominic in exchange for a lighter sentence, this whole thing unravels fast. I thought for a moment, can you get this information to the FBI? Already sent it through the anonymous tip line this afternoon. But Connor, there's something else you need to know. What? Your parents. They've been listed as co-signers on 3 of the fraudulent loans. If the FBI digs deep enough, they could be implicated too. My stomach dropped. They didn't know. Dominic forged the paperwork. I believe you. But proving that is going to be hard. The signatures match. The notarizations are legitimate, and unless we can show they were coerced or misled, the law's going to assume they knew what they were signing. I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of it all pressing down. I need to talk to them. Are you sure that's a good idea? No, but I don't have a choice. The next morning, Maxwell picked me up at 9:30 a.m. in his silver sedan. We drove east along the Columbia River Gorge, the water glittering under the late summer sun, the cliffs rising steep and green on either side. Hood River was about an hour away, a small town known for windsurfing and orchards, the kind of place people moved to when they wanted to escape the noise of the city. Colleen Vareth lived in a modest house on the edge of town, surrounded by apple trees. She was waiting for us on the front porch, a woman in her late 70s with silver hair and sharp eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. Maxwell, she said, shaking his hand, and you must be Connor. Yes, ma'am. She studied me for a moment, then nodded. You look like your grandmother. Same eyes, same stubborn jaw. I didn't know what to say to that, so I just smiled. She led us inside to a small office lined with filing cabinets and bookshelves. On the desk was a thick folder, already open, papers spread out like she'd been reviewing them before we arrived. I've been holding on to these for 5 years, she said, sitting down. Your grandmother made me promise I'd give them to you directly, not to your father, not to anyone else. But you never came asking, so I kept waiting. I didn't know, I said quietly. No one told me. She nodded. I'm not surprised. Your father made it very clear he didn't want anyone digging into the estate, but your grandmother knew he'd try to bury this, so she made sure I had everything documented. She slid a ledger across the desk. This is the full accounting of your grandfather's trust. It was established in 1998 with an initial endowment of $1.2 million. By the time your grandfather passed in 2015, it had grown to just over $3 million. The terms of the trust specified equal distribution among his 3 grandchildren once they turned 30. I scanned the ledger. My name was listed, along with Dominic's and Autumn's. But next to my name, instead of a distribution amount, there was just a note. Deferred pending executor approval. What does that mean? I asked. Colin's expression hardened. It means your father blocked your distribution. He claimed you were financially irresponsible and that releasing the funds would be detrimental to your long-term interests. That's insane. I was running a successful company. I know. I told him that. But he had the legal authority as executor, so there wasn't much I could do. However, she pulled out another document. Your grandmother anticipated this. She added a codicil to her will specifically stating that if your father abused his authority as executor, the trust would be transferred to an independent trustee, and you'd have the right to petition for full disclosure. Maxwell leaned forward. Did that codicil ever get executed? It should have, but it was never filed with the probate court. I brought it to your father, and he said he'd handle it. He never did. I felt anger rising in my chest, hot and sharp. So, he just kept the money? Not exactly, Colin said. He distributed Dominic's share in full, $987,000. And he gave Autumn half of hers. But yours was frozen, and as far as I can tell, it's still sitting in the trust account. Maxwell looked at me. Connor, you know what this means. I nodded slowly. It means I can file a petition to remove my father as executor and claim what's mine. Colin handed me a business card. This is the attorney I'd recommend. Her name is Piper Stone. She specializes in trust disputes. Tell her I sent you. I took the card, staring at the name. Thank you for keeping all of this, for waiting. Your grandmother was a good woman, Colin said. She deserved better than what your family did to her memory. I'm glad you're finally here to set things right. We left an hour later, the folder tucked under my arm, my mind racing. On the drive back to Portland, Maxwell broke the silence. You're going to sue your father. I don't have a choice. This is going to destroy what's left of your family. I stared out the window at the river rushing past. They destroyed it a long time ago. I'm just cleaning up the wreckage. The law offices of Pemberton and Associates occupied the entire 9th floor of a glass tower on Southwest 5th Avenue. It was the kind of place designed to intimidate, with marble floors, recessed lighting, and a reception area that looked like it belonged in a modern art museum. I arrived at 9:45 a.m., 15 minutes before the emergency board meeting Maxwell had managed to arrange. This wasn't a traditional board meeting. It was a trust oversight hearing, convened by the 3 independent trustees who'd been appointed when my grandfather first established the trust. They had the authority to review the executor's decisions and, if necessary, remove him from his position. Maxwell had filed the petition 3 days ago, citing breach of fiduciary duty, and somehow, miraculously, the trustees had agreed to hear the case immediately. My father's attorney had tried to get it postponed, tried to argue that there wasn't enough time to prepare a defense, but Piper Stone, the attorney Colin had recommended, had submitted such a comprehensive brief, backed by decades of documentation, that the trustees saw no reason to delay. I sat in the waiting area, watching other lawyers come and go, their expensive shoes clicking against the marble. Maxwell sat beside me, reviewing his notes one last time. Piper was already inside, setting up the presentation. At 9:58, the receptionist called my name. Mr. Blake, they're ready for you. I stood, straightened my tie, and walked through the heavy wooden doors into the conference room. It was long and narrow, with a table that could seat 20 people. At the far end sat the 3 trustees, an older woman with steel gray hair, a middle-aged man in a navy suit, and a younger woman who couldn't have been more than 35 holding a tablet and stylus. My father sat on the left side of the table with his attorney, a man named Vincent Shaw who had a reputation for winning impossible cases. My father didn't look at me when I entered. He kept his eyes fixed on the table in front of him, jaw set, hands folded. Across from them, Piper gestured to the empty seats. Maxwell and I sat down. Piper remained standing, a wireless presenter remote in her hand. The older trustee, whose nameplate read Margaret Foster, cleared her throat. Let's begin. Miss Stone, you filed the petition on behalf of Connor Blake. Please present your case. Piper nodded and pressed a button. The screen behind her lit up with a title slide. Petition for removal of executor breach of fiduciary duty. Thank you, Mrs. Foster, Piper began. This case is straightforward. Harold Blake was named executor of the family trust established by his father, Richard Blake, in 1998. The trust explicitly states that all funds are to be distributed equally among Richard's 3 grandchildren, Dominic Blake, Autumn Freeman, and Connor Blake, upon each reaching the age of 30. She clicked to the next slide, showing the trust document with the relevant section highlighted. Connor Blake turned 33 years ago. At that time, his share of the trust was valued at approximately $987,000. He never received it. Harold Blake, acting as executor, blocked the distribution, claiming Connor was financially irresponsible and that releasing the funds would be detrimental to his interests. Vincent Shaw leaned forward. "Mrs. Foster, if I may interject, Mr. Harold Blake had legitimate concerns about his son's financial management at the time. Connor Blake was under federal investigation for wire fraud. Releasing nearly $1 million to someone facing criminal charges would have been reckless." Piper didn't miss a beat. The charges were dismissed, completely, without prejudice. The investigation found no evidence of wrongdoing because the evidence against Connor Blake was fabricated. She clicked to the next slide. A timeline appeared, showing the date of my arrest, the date the charges were filed, and the date they were dismissed. "But here's what's interesting," Piper continued. "Harold Blake blocked Connor's distribution 3 months before the arrest, not after, before. Which means the excuse he's using now wasn't even relevant at the time he made the decision." The room went silent. I glanced at my father. His attorney leaned over and whispered something in his ear. My father's expression didn't change. Margaret Foster looked down at her notes. "Miss Stone, do you have evidence that Mr. Harold Blake was aware of the impending arrest before it happened?" "I have something better," Piper said. She clicked again. The screen filled with an email. The sender, Harold Blake. The recipient, Dominic Blake. The date, 4 months before my arrest. The email was short. "Connor's becoming a problem. His company's getting too much attention. We need to slow him down before he starts asking questions about the trust. I've already delayed his distribution. If you can find a way to keep him distracted, that would help." Dominic's response, sent 2 hours later, "I'll handle it." The trustees leaned forward, reading the email carefully. The younger woman, whose nameplate read Natalie Chen, frowned. "Where did you obtain this correspondence?" "From Harold Blake's personal email account," Piper said. "Legally obtained through discovery after Connor filed a civil suit for access to trust records. Mr. Blake was required to turn over all communications related to the trust. This was in that production." Vincent Shaw stood abruptly. "Your Honors, this email is being taken out of context. My client was simply expressing concern about his son's business dealings, which at the time were under scrutiny by federal regulators." "Except they weren't," Piper countered. "Not yet. The FBI investigation didn't begin until 3 months after this email was sent. Which means Harold Blake knew something was coming, and the only way he could have known is if someone told him." She clicked to the next slide. Another email, this one from Dominic to Harold. "It's done. The complaint's been filed. Should buy us at least a year, maybe more if it goes to trial." I felt my chest tighten. I'd suspected my father knew about the setup, but seeing it in writing, seeing the casual way they'd discussed destroying my life, made it real, in a way I hadn't fully processed. Margaret Foster removed her glasses and set them on the table. "Mr. Shaw, does your client have a response to this?" My father finally looked up. His voice was steady, almost defiant. "I was protecting the family. Connor was reckless. He was making decisions that could have exposed us all to liability. I did what I thought was necessary." "You set me up," I said quietly. Everyone turned to look at me. "You knew Dominic was planning to file a false report, and you let it happen. You helped him." "I didn't help him," my father snapped. "I just didn't stop him. There's a difference." "Not to the law," Piper said. "Conspiracy doesn't require active participation. It only requires knowledge and intent. And this email clearly shows both." The middle-aged trustee, whose nameplate read Robert Langley, leaned back in his chair. "Miss Stone, what exactly are you asking for?" "3 things," Piper said. "First, immediate removal of Harold Blake as executor. Second, appointment of an independent trustee to oversee the remaining trust assets. Third, full distribution of Connor Blake's share, plus interest and damages for the 3-year delay." Vincent Shaw scoffed. "Damages on what grounds?" "Emotional distress, reputational harm, and lost investment opportunity. Connor Blake's share of the trust has been sitting in a low-yield account for 3 years, while the market has grown by over 40%. Had he received his distribution on time, he could have invested it and earned substantial returns. That's a quantifiable loss. Margaret Foster looked at my father. Mr. Blake, do you have anything else to add? My father stood slowly. He looked older than I remembered, his shoulders slightly hunched, the lines in his face deeper. I did what I thought was right. I won't apologize for that. You should, I said, standing as well, because you didn't just delay a distribution. You stole 3 years of my life. You let Dominic destroy my reputation, my company, my relationships. All, so he could keep playing his games with money that was never his. My father's jaw tightened. You always thought you were better than us. No, I said, I just refuse to be like you. Margaret Foster raised her hand. That's enough. We'll review the evidence and issue a ruling within 48 hours. This hearing is adjourned. The gavel came down, a sharp crack that echoed through the room. My father grabbed his briefcase and walked out without looking at me. Vincent Shaw followed, muttering something under his breath. Piper turned to me, a small smile on her face. That went well. Did it? Better than well. They're going to rule in your favor. I've seen enough of these cases to know when the trustees have made up their minds. Maxwell clapped me on the shoulder. She's right. You did good in there. But I didn't feel good. I felt hollow, like I'd just burned down the last bridge connecting me to the family I used to have. I walked out of the conference room and took the elevator down to the lobby, stepping out into the bright afternoon sun. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. You just made the biggest mistake of your life. I stared at the message, then deleted it. I didn't have time for threats. Not anymore. 2 days later, the ruling came through. Harold Blake was removed as executor. An independent trustee was appointed. And I was awarded my full distribution, plus $340,000 in damages and accrued interest. But the real victory came that evening when Maxwell forwarded me an email from the FBI. They'd arrested Hayden Burke, the loan officer from Cascade Financial. He'd agreed to cooperate in exchange for a reduced sentence, and the first name he gave them was Dominic Blake. The news broke on a Thursday morning. I was sitting in a cafe on Northwest 23rd Avenue, drinking coffee and reading through emails, when my phone started buzzing nonstop. Texts, calls, notifications from news apps, all coming in at once. I opened the first notification. The headline made me set my coffee down. FBI arrests Portland real estate developer in multi-million-dollar fraud scheme. Below it was Dominic's face, a photo from one of his press appearances, smiling confidently in a tailored suit. The article detailed the charges: conspiracy to commit wire fraud, bank fraud, falsification of loan documents, and money laundering. The FBI had executed a search warrant at his office early that morning, seizing computers, files, and financial records. Hayden Burke's cooperation had given them everything they needed. My phone rang. Maxwell. You seeing this? He asked. Just now. It's all over the news. Local stations are running it as breaking news. They're camped outside his office building. I closed my laptop. What happens now? Now, he gets arraigned, probably later today. They'll set bail, but given the severity of the charges and the flight risk, I'd be surprised if they let him out. Connor, this is it. This is what you've been working toward. I know. Then why don't you sound happy? I didn't have an answer for that. I hung up and sat there for a long time, watching people walk past the window, oblivious to everything happening just a few miles away. By noon, the story had spread beyond Portland. National financial news outlets picked it up. Headlines like "Real Estate Mogul's Empire Built on Fraud" and "Brothers Tip Leads to Major FBI Bust" started appearing. Some of them mentioned me by name, noting that I'd been previously investigated and cleared, that I'd been the target of false accusations that were now revealed to be part of a larger scheme. My phone rang again. This time, it was a number I recognized. My mother. I hesitated, then answered. Hello? Connor. Her voice was shaky, barely holding together. Have you seen the news? Yes. They arrested Dominic. They're saying terrible things. That he's been stealing, lying, that he used our house as collateral for loans we didn't even know about. It's all true, Mom. There was a long silence. Then, quietly, how do you know? Because I'm the one who gave the FBI the evidence. I heard her breath catch. You did this. You turned in your own brother. He turned on me first. 3 years ago when he had me arrested on charges he knew were false. You were there, you saw them take me away, and you didn't say a word." "We didn't know," she said, her voice breaking. "We thought you'd gotten mixed up in something. Dominic said you were trying to take advantage of the family, that you were using the company to hide money. And you believed him. He's your brother." "So am I said. "But that didn't stop you from assuming I was guilty." She started crying. Soft, desperate sobs that might have broken me a few years ago. But now they just sounded distant, like they were coming from someone I used to know. "Your father's health isn't good," she said between sobs. "The stress from all of this, the hearing, now this with Dominic, it's killing him. Please, Connor, whatever you're planning to do next, just stop. Let the lawyers handle it. Don't make this worse." "I didn't make this, Mom. Dominic did. And Dad helped him. You both did, by choosing to believe his lies over my truth. We're still your parents." "Then maybe you should have acted like it." I hung up before she could respond. My hands were shaking, not from anger but from something deeper. Something that felt like grief, mixed with relief. I'd spent so long wanting their approval, their belief in me, and now that I'd finally stopped caring, I realized how much lighter I felt. That afternoon, I met with Sienna at her office in the Pearl District. She'd been monitoring the FBI's moves, tracking the media coverage, and compiling a final report on everything we'd uncovered. "They're going after him hard," she said, pulling up a document on her screen. "The charges carry a maximum sentence of 30 years. Even with a plea deal, he's looking at a decade minimum. What about Hayden Burke? He'll probably get 5 years, maybe less if his cooperation leads to more arrests. But Connor, there's something else you need to know." I leaned forward. "What?" "The FBI is looking into your father, too, Harold Blake. They found emails showing he had knowledge of the fraud and may have helped conceal some of the transactions. They haven't filed charges yet, but it's coming." I sat back, processing that. Part of me felt vindicated. Another part just felt tired. "There's one more thing," Sienna said. She pulled up a news article from earlier that morning. Dominic gave an interview before they arrested him. It went live about an hour ago. She pressed play. The video showed Dominic sitting in his office, looking directly at the camera. His voice was calm, measured, the same tone he'd used at family dinners when he wanted to sound reasonable. "I want to address the allegations that have been made against me," he said. "My brother, Connor Blake, has been waging a personal vendetta against me for years. He's bitter about his own failures and has decided to blame me for them. The truth is, I tried to help him. I tried to guide him away from risky business decisions that could have hurt our family. But he refused to listen. And now, because he can't accept responsibility for his own mistakes, he's fabricated evidence and manipulated federal investigators to target me." I felt my jaw clench. Sienna reached over and paused the video. "He's trying to flip the narrative," she said, "make you look like the villain. Let him try. Connor, this could get ugly. If he starts doing interviews, if he convinces people that you're behind some kind of conspiracy, then we release everything. Every email, every transaction record, every piece of evidence we gave to the FBI, we make it public." She hesitated. "That could compromise the investigation." "I don't care. I'm not letting him rewrite history. Not this time." That night, I contacted a journalist I trusted, a woman named Tessa McCarthy, who'd covered my original arrest and had later written a follow-up piece when the charges were dismissed. I sent her the full evidence packet, everything except what was under seal by the FBI, and gave her permission to publish it. Her article went live at 6 a.m. the next morning. The headline read, "The Real Story Behind the Blake Brothers, Fraud, Betrayal, and a 3-Year Fight for Justice." It detailed everything: the fabricated charges against me, the emails between Dominic and my father, the shell companies, the offshore accounts, the fraudulent loans. It included quotes from Colleen Vireth about the trust dispute, and from Hayden Burke's attorney confirming his cooperation with federal investigators. By 9 a.m., the story had been picked up by major outlets. By noon, Dominic's earlier interview had been pulled from the network's website. And by 5 p.m., his attorney released a statement saying Dominic would no longer be speaking to the media. Maxwell called me that evening. "You know you just went nuclear, right?" "I know." "Dominic's going to fight back. He's going to claim defamation, invasion of privacy, whatever his lawyers can think of. Let him. Discovery works both ways. If he sues me, he'll have to turn over even more evidence." Maxwell laughed, a short, incredulous sound. You've really thought this through. I've had 3 years to think about it. A week later, Dominic's arraignment was held at the federal courthouse downtown. I didn't attend, but Maxwell did. He called me afterward with the update. Bail was denied. The judge cited flight risk and the severity of the charges. He's being held at the federal detention center until trial. When's the trial? Probably 6 months, maybe longer. But Connor, his attorney's already talking about a plea deal. If he cooperates, gives up everyone else involved in the scheme, he might be able to reduce his sentence. Who else is there? That's the question everyone's asking. The FBI thinks this goes deeper than just Dominic and Burke. They're looking at other developers, other loan officers, maybe even some city officials who approve permits for projects that never got built. I thought about that, about how far the corruption had spread, about how many people had been complicit, either actively or through willful ignorance. What about Dad? I asked. Maxwell paused. They're still building the case, but yeah, it's likely he'll be charged, probably as an accessory. He won't get as much time as Dominic, but it'll be enough. I hung up and walked to the window. The city stretched out before me, lights beginning to flicker on as the sun set behind the West Hills. Somewhere out there, Dominic was sitting in a cell, probably still convinced he'd done nothing wrong. Somewhere else, my father was trying to figure out how to explain all of this to his friends, to his business associates, to anyone who'd still take his calls. And here I was, standing in an apartment I'd rented under a name they didn't know, in a city that had once felt like home but now felt like something else. Not quite home, not quite foreign, just different. My phone buzzed, a text from Ivy Newman, my former assistant from Apex Meridian. Saw the news. I always knew you were innocent. I'm sorry I didn't say that sooner. I stared at the message for a long time before typing back. Thank you. That means more than you know. She responded immediately. If you ever start another company, I want in. I smiled, the first real smile I'd felt in days. I'll keep that in mind. That night, I slept better than I had in months. Not because everything was resolved, but because for the first time in 3 years, I wasn't the one fighting from a position of defense. I wasn't the one trying to prove my innocence or clear my name. I was just Connor Blake, and that was enough. 6 months later, I found myself standing outside Cascade Financial Group's headquarters on a gray Tuesday morning. The building looked different than I remembered, smaller somehow, less imposing. Or maybe I was just different. The glass doors reflected my image back at me, a man in a simple charcoal suit. No briefcase, no entourage, just me and a single manila envelope tucked under my arm. I hadn't been inside this building since the day they took me away in handcuffs. The day Dominic stood across the street, watching, smiling. The day my world collapsed, and I thought it would never be rebuilt. But here I was, rebuilt, stronger, different. I pushed through the doors and walked to the reception desk. The woman behind it looked up, her practiced smile already forming. Good morning. How can I help you? I'm here to see the interim CEO. I don't have an appointment, but I think she'll want to see me. She glanced at her computer screen. And your name? Connor Blake. The smile faltered, just for a second. Then she picked up the phone, spoke quietly, and hung up. She'll be right down. I waited near the window, watching people move through the lobby. Employees heading to meetings, clients waiting in the sitting area. Everyone going about their day like this was just another ordinary morning. For them, it probably was. The elevator doors opened, and Grace Harris stepped out. She'd been promoted to interim CEO after the previous leadership had been removed following the fraud investigation. I'd never met her, but Maxwell had spoken highly of her, said she was one of the few executives who'd been completely clean when the FBI came through. She walked directly to me, hand extended. Mr. Blake, this is unexpected. I appreciate you seeing me without notice. After everything that's happened, it's the least I could do. Would you like to come up to my office? I shook my head. This won't take long. I just wanted to give you something. I handed her the envelope. She opened it carefully, pulling out the document inside. Her eyes scanned the page, then widened slightly. This is a donation agreement, she said, for a financial literacy program, specifically for young entrepreneurs who've been denied traditional funding because of their background, their credit history, or because someone decided they weren't worth the risk. She looked up at me. Mr. Blake, this is $500,000. I know what it is. Why Cascade Financial? After what happened to you here? Because this is where it started. And I want it to be where something good starts too. Those kids, the ones who get told they're not good enough, they deserve a chance. They deserve someone to believe in them, even when no one else will. Grace's expression softened. We'd be honored to administer this program, and Mr. Blake, for what it's worth, I'm sorry. For what happened to you, for how long it took us to see the truth. You weren't here when it happened. You have nothing to apologize for. Still, on behalf of this institution, I'm sorry. I nodded once, then turned toward the doors. But I stopped halfway and looked back. One more thing. There's a woman named Ivy Newman. She used to work for me at Apex Meridian. If she applies for any positions here, I'd appreciate it if you'd give her application serious consideration. She's brilliant, loyal, and she stood by me when everyone else walked away. I'll make sure of it personally. I walked out into the gray morning, the air crisp and clean, carrying that distinct scent of rain that Portland wore like cologne. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment, looking up at the building one last time. Then I pulled out my phone and made a call. Ivy answered on the second ring. Connor, hi. What's up? How would you feel about starting something new with me? There was a pause, then excitement flooded her voice. Are you serious? You're starting another company? Not exactly a company, more like a foundation. For entrepreneurs who need support, mentorship, funding, people who've been told no too many times. I want to be the yes they've been waiting for. I'm in. Whatever you need, I'm in. I smiled. Good, because I'm going to need someone I can trust. Meet me tomorrow morning. We have a lot of work to do. I hung up and started walking. Not toward my car, but down the street, past the coffee shops and boutiques, past the places I used to know when this city felt like home. It still didn't feel quite like home. Not yet. But maybe it didn't need to. Maybe home wasn't a place. Maybe it was just the feeling of knowing you'd survived something that should have destroyed you, and you'd come out the other side not bitter but better. My phone buzzed. A news alert. Dominic Blake, sentenced to 14 years in federal prison. I read the headline, then closed the notification without reading the article. I didn't need to know the details. That chapter was over. 3 blocks later, I found myself standing in front of a small storefront with brown paper covering the windows. A for lease sign hung in the door. I peered through a gap in the paper. Empty space, good bones, natural light streaming through the back windows. It would need work, but it had potential. I took a photo of the leasing agent's number and kept walking. By the time I reached my car, the sun had broken through the clouds, casting everything in that golden light that only happens after rain. I slid into the driver's seat and sat there for a moment, hands on the wheel, breathing. Somewhere across town, my father was probably meeting with his attorney, preparing for his own trial. Somewhere else, my mother was trying to hold together a family that had already fallen apart. And somewhere in a federal prison, Dominic was learning what it felt like to lose everything. But I wasn't thinking about them, not anymore. I was thinking about the kids who'd walk through the doors of whatever space I ended up leasing. The ones who'd been told they weren't smart enough, connected enough, polished enough to succeed. The ones who just needed someone to see them, really see them, the way my grandmother had seen me. I started the engine and pulled out into traffic, heading toward a future I was finally ready to build. Not for revenge, not for vindication, just for the quiet satisfaction of knowing that the name Connor Blake, the one they'd tried to bury, destroy, and erase, would be the foundation that lifted others up. They dropped my badge on the floor once, but today, my name stands for something they could never take away. The truth, resilience, and the absolute refusal to stay silent. And that was worth more than any empire built on lies could ever be. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.